Welcome to the Real Talks with SOSAD Ireland Wellbeing Series. My name is Alan O'Mara. I'm the founder of Real Talks, a former Cavan GAA player, an author and a performance and wellbeing coach with sports and business leaders around the world. This week's episode is with David Balfe, aka For Those I Love. David and I were great friends when we were kids growing up and spent countless hours on the streets of Donemead in Dublin together. When my family moved to Cavan, our lives went in different directions, and this conversation is the first time we've spoken for almost 20 years. In that time, David has become an extremely talented and renowned musician. He has featured on some of the world's biggest TV shows and stages, and his self-titled album, For Those I Love, won Album of the Year. It's a beautiful record, but it's also full of pain and raw and honest and insightful. You're also listening to the first of a two-part conversation because once we got started, we couldn't stop talking. In this episode, we talk about the good and bad of growing up in Dublin, the power of music, and his mental health struggles. We talk about self-worth, depression, and panic attacks. We talk about the power of counselling and the long and winding process of learning to cope, survive, and live again after you've been struggling. This conversation is part of the Real Talks with SOSAD Ireland Wellbeing Series. You can check out our Wellbeing Hub at sosadireland.ie/Real Talks, or you can also search for Real Talks on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Before we get to that conversation, I just want to remind all our listeners that SOSAD Ireland is here to support you in your mental health. SOSAD Ireland provides support and services free of charge to people who are struggling with suicidal ideation, self-harming, bereavement, depression, stress, anxiety, or if you simply need to talk. Please go to www.sosadireland.ie to learn more about services like counselling, crisis support, a 24/7 helpline, and text messaging service. If you are in a crisis situation and need urgent help, please call 1-800-901-909 now. Thanks for listening. David, look, first of all, just thanks so much for joining us on the Real Talks with SOSAD Ireland Wellbeing Series. As I've been thinking about this conversation over the last couple of weeks and prepping for it and preparing for it, it's been quite a strange experience because in some ways I know you really well and in other ways I don't know you at all. So for anyone that's listening to this that doesn't know, we grew up on the same street in Donemead. Probably spent more days done not together up till about 10 or 11 when my parents relocated to Cavan, and then obviously like a fork in the road, our lives go in different ways, and we've gone on to do a number of different things, and we're going to talk about what you've been up to over the course of this conversation. But I was just going to start, as I was thinking back, I was nearly laughing at childhood memories. I was going to bounce a couple off you, see if they were real, if I'm imagining them.
Bring them on.
A couple of things that came to mind that I wrote down was around the corner wearing fake Predators, playing football in a green. I have playing curbs and tip the can for hours. I have doing knick-knacks, sometimes getting caught. I have a memory of shooting off a Nerf gun and hitting someone on a motorbike and chasing us.
I was going to bring that up. I remember it being a car, not a motorbike, but I remember I was going to bring that up, and I swear to God, that's still to this day the fastest I've ever ran. Ever. I knew you were going to say that one. Yeah. Any more, bring them on. I'll take them all.
Yeah, it's funny, and some of these memories, and again, bear in mind, you yourself, sometimes memories are clear, and sometimes they're a little bit fuzzy, and you might have a slightly different variation of it. I remember of a memory of popping off the back of a bike doing a night rider and it hammering into I think a moped coming out of a lane somewhere and being chased. I've got playing football on the streets, whacking it off a front window with a neighbour coming out with a knife saying they were going to burst our football.
Yeah, 100% true.
And then I have a couple of other ones I remember going around with plastic bags, scooping up snow to put it in the freezer.
Fucking hell. Yeah, Jesus. I have forgotten a load of these, but yeah.
It's funny as I'm thinking about all these things, like I think I've got three more and then I'll throw it over to you, but I have a memory of lying in your front garden reading Harry Potter and telling my little brother to go away because he was wrecking me head. I think we were at karate or kickboxing at some stage and I kicked you a low blow and by accident and I had to go and sit on my knees and I was giving out and I don't think I went back.
Classically, I don't remember that one, but I think that's obviously for a reason. I've shut that out.
And then my last one I have before I throw it over to you is I remember just messing around on skateboards and rollerblades, playing hockey with pucks, and then trying to do ollies and falling and knee pads and helmets and all sorts, and just kind of. But I suppose my memory is just that kind of naive and just a simple kind of childhood where we were messing, but never up to too much badness. And I just have a lot of good memories there of laugh and enjoy. I don't know what that's like for you.
Very much. A lot of those I remember really clearly, particularly, and this is a terrible one for me because I always take the piss out of people over Harry Potter, but I do remember sitting in my front garden reading Harry Potter books, and I believe that was because it was the day after or the day of the Goblet of Fire came out, and I'm pretty sure we all went to Donemead Shopping Centre at like 6 a.m. or something to like get the books when it was opening in the bookstore. Yeah. I think a lot of my memories are pretty much the exact same. Most of them are going to involve football to some degree or another, and always with a little bit of an underlying tone of mischief, like we probably shouldn't have been milling cars out with the ball, but it was all like relatively innocent. I think we were just being nuisances, and mostly because we probably didn't have a whole lot else to do. I mean, I think childhood is probably a very different experience now than what it was in the 90s, because this would have been between, let's say 95 and 2000 or something.
Yeah.
From sort of 4 or 5 up until 10. And how much, I would say how much freedom there was just by going outside. One of the things that I lament an awful lot is I would still love to, just for nostalgia, have the experience of just like knocking for one of my friends. It's like, it's not a thing. I can't just turn up at somebody's house now and be like, are you coming out? Like, I miss that feeling, and it is a very juvenile thing, and I think that needs to be respected. It is something that we lose an awful lot in adulthood. But yeah, I remember all of those things. I remember, I'm trying to think other things that I'm pretty sure I remember. So you had like a kitchen, and then at the back of your kitchen you had like an extra area with a couch and stuff. And I think you had a skybox or whatever. I didn't have a skybox. I used to play games on the skybox with the remote control, if I remember.
It's that Bumblebee game, I think it was.
Yeah. I distinctly remember that. And I'm also pretty sure I remember you being obsessive. I hope I don't have this wrong, and I might, but pretty obsessive about Football Manager, I think it would have been. But
not much has changed in that regard.
Yeah, I'd say so. But yeah, I do remember that. I remember the day that you told me you were moving to Cavan as well.
Really?
I distinctly remember it, because you had a floor plan of the house in Cavan, and you like something out of a kid's movie with a treasure team in it or something. You like rolled it out on the table, and you're like, yeah, this is going to be our new house. And I was like, that's bonkers. I probably had never seen a floor plan either. But yeah, I do remember that. I don't remember when you actually moved, but I remember when you said like, we're going to be moving. One of the most distinct memories I have is that Nerf gun. And I think because of how much terror I felt. I remember playing in the green, like, it was a green that we didn't usually play in. It was around the corner from my house, but not the big one. It was a smaller one that had cars parked all the way around it. Mm-hmm. And we kicked a football, and it accidentally knocked a wing mirror off the car. And I believe it was you that was like, we need to go and tell whoever's car this is that we've done it. So we knocked on some houses, and then whoever it was, I was like, we don't need to tell anybody. We need to get out of here straight away. But whoever owned the car was like, oh, it's okay. He was like, I run a body shop or something. He's like, I'll fix it. Like, whatever it was, his career just lined up with the exact damage that was done to the car, or so he said to us.
Right.
Maybe he was just being nice, because it was like, you know, 5-7-year-olds or something knocking on the gaff saying like, we've broken your car. But yeah,
Crazy.
really, I remember feeling conflicted because I was afraid to go to the house to say we have done something we shouldn't have done, even though it was an accident. And I'm pretty sure it was you that was like, nah, we should do this. But I don't know, I'm hazy on a lot of those memories. But yeah, I guess, yeah, an early memory of sort of facing the consequences of something that you've done and being like, all right, gotta just see how this goes. And it worked out great. But yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. You remember us rolling out because I've no memory of rolling out the floor pan like that, and like I remember when we were moving, like being kind of like somewhat like heartbroken and kind of like didn't want to do it, and then obviously like what 10 or 11-year-old wants to move, you feel like your whole world's being torn apart.
Yeah.
And even as I was thinking there, you know, we were living in North Dublin. There's a big world out there, and kind of you touched upon there, be able to knock for your mates, like just that as a kid, like that sense of community and connection just on your street, like you kind of, your needs are being met on one single road. And I just, like, I'm sure lots of stuff happened that was good and bad, and there was ups and downs, and obviously the memory kind of remembers, I feel like, the good or like the funnier memories. Like, it's so funny, we both remember the Nerf gun, like you're talking 20, like it was 20 something years ago.
Easily.
Yeah, like that's just crazy. And then I suppose, like, in terms of today then, David, like as you kind of go, because like literally, as I said to you at the beginning, like you have that sense of such clear memories and know each other so well, but then also we don't know each other at all anymore, really. And like, in kind of, so there's a fork in the road there. And I was going to just jump in, like, from that point of like at your teenage years, then you're in Chanel College in Coolock, right? I kind of just what your teenage years are like growing up, kind of when music presents itself into your life, becomes kind of a big thing, and kind of how you look back on the next chapter, the next block of your life.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think about it a lot, and I think there's probably a couple of years in my life that are maybe a little bit missing to my memory. But probably just because not much happened. So, I mean, there was probably a period between the joyful era of youth where we were just having fun, going out, playing football, and just causing like pretty minimal mischief, but just having like overall a good experience. And then the period of time where I started to build new connections with people in my early teen years in school, and my world opened up geographically much more. I think there's this like missing block there where I didn't really do anything. And what by that I mean like that I probably did what a lot of 11-year-olds did, which was just like stayed in and played a PlayStation or something, and was a bit too hesitant to just go out into the world and kick a football around or go on a skateboard, or maybe those options weren't there at that time. I don't know, but I think I kind of remember. I just remember my life picking back up again, in general, with the same sense of like wonder and opportunity that was there in early years when I started in secondary school. I mean, primary school, I remember an awful lot from it, but maybe the later years in it, I remember a lot less. And then secondary school, obviously, is like such a... It's at least for me, I found it to be like a really confronting experience straight away, because it was so different to everything that I had known up until that point. Even if that's just the expansion of the geography by an extra 2 or 3 miles, because I was only going up the road to Coolock from Donaghmede. It's just a Tonaghy Road straight up. But it's not just that your geography opens up into that area, it's that your whole world experiences starts to open up because you're meeting so many more people. And for the first time, I'm starting to connect with people, not just based on proximity to where I am, but based on what we both have an invested interest in, or how our personalities link up in some way or another. Of course, those relationships change an awful lot over the course of those 6 years in secondary school, and the people that I meet on day one are not necessarily the people that I'm still close with when it comes to the final day in secondary school. But I do think there's something really interesting there where it's maybe one of the first times in my experience where you start to almost like choose your friends as opposed to your, like, I would say I was very lucky in my earliest years because I feel like I had very good friends in my earliest years just by chance, by proximity. I think it was great. It was really healthy relationships with everyone, and probably had a massive impact on who I was at that stage or who I developed into, for good and bad reasons. But then in secondary school, it's so different. You're not contained in the same way. You've got whatever it is, 90 people in your year to start to bond and develop with, instead of just the 5 that are in the area that you're born directly into. I don't know. I started to I made some really strong connections early on, and I'm very glad of that. I think even before mentioning those connections, because I'm talking about that expansion of life experience that happens when you hit secondary school, I did find it to be a pretty frightening experience in some ways, and also a very exciting experience in some ways, because of just how different it was. I went to an all-boys secondary school, which I wouldn't recommend to anybody for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think developmentally it's not a great option. And also, I would say it was a pretty aggressive place. Certainly seems to be one of the major memories that all of my school peers that I've stayed in contact with, that I've kept nurturing relationships with, also retain, is that it was a pretty aggressive place. I don't know what your experience was like in secondary school, but I think that that's probably a pretty common one in a lot of ways.
In terms of masculinity and aggression?
Yeah, I think so. Like, you're whatever, 12 or 13, you're going through a wide array of feelings and developmental angst that you probably can't make any sense of. And you're doing that in a pressure cooker filled with other people going through the same things and bringing in their own weight of their own background, their own home life, their own, whatever that personal lack might be that they feel. Of course, it's going to be a bit of an aggressive place. Of course, it's going to be maybe more violent than it should be. I speak to some of my old teachers now, particularly one of them, and he's, at least to me, has sort of mentioned that things aren't as much like that now. People are a lot more accepting. That sounds great to me, and I'm really happy that that's the case. Mm-hmm. I hope that's the case. I mean, it's anecdotal. I hope it's the case. But yeah, I think it was like a pretty frightening and bewildering experience when you first go into that. You go in a little bit alone as well, maybe. I don't know if that was more so for you. I'm not sure how old you were when you moved up to Cavan and at what stage you were hitting secondary school in comparison to that. But yeah, like I'm not even entirely sure that feeling changed a huge amount between the 6 years that I was in that school. I think you just become a lot better at dealing with that. You become a lot better at negotiating your space, your role in that ecosystem. You become a lot better at negotiating other people's feelings, and you either become better at becoming smaller when you need to, or you become better at becoming bigger when you need to, and stepping into a situation to try and diffuse. But I mean, I do hope that things have changed quite a lot since then. No doubt that my experience in school was drastically different to whatever my dad's was. So the hope is that, these things do change an awful lot. But, pretty aggressive, like first and second year in school, I would say, before you kind of get your own groove. And I think a lot of that is dependent on the relationships that you build within that secondary school as well. I mean, I look back and I can't really remember how I was thinking when I was going into secondary school, but I can remember some of the things that either were done to me or that I saw to, be done to other people. And I have to imagine that the people who, like the aggressor in those situations, was very much so trying to assert themselves, probably out of a place of fear in the first place. I mean, I think maybe you learn a little bit as you grow older that a lot of that aggression comes out of a place of fear. A lot of that comes out of it's a very complicated at times reaction that can really be predicated on your home life or life outside of that school. It can be very much predicated on your own chemical makeup and the complexities of that. I can only imagine that the people who did have those really violent early acts in school were doing that out of a place of fear, either fear of the environment, fear of what would happen if they didn't assert themselves as a dominant force, or a reactionary fear of what was happening to them day on day. As I know, maybe one or two of the earliest, most aggressive things that I saw in school, which I didn't and couldn't make sense of at the time, but that is still a point of conversation between myself and my school peers now. You look at it and you go, no, that was clearly a reaction to somebody who was being like severely bullied for the first 2 or 3 weeks. They didn't know what to do because they were 13 or whatever they were. So they had a like really over the top violent outburst, and that's what caused that. I think when you start to develop those relationships with people and you start to find your own cliques, which I was very lucky enough to have done, because I know some people are not as lucky there, and my heart goes out to them, because I can only imagine how alienating and lonely school could be if you didn't have that relationship. But once you build those relationships, you feel like maybe you've got not just a support system in in an emotional sense, but also a support system in a very practical sense, that if somebody's going to try and assert their own dominance over you, there's other people there to try and diffuse that, maybe in one way, or get in the way of that in another way, or even just giving you the space to go and stand beside somebody else who is invested in the positive parts in your life and invested in your happiness and your development as a person. It definitely makes school a much better place, a much more welcoming place to be, and a much more exciting place to be. And gets you, or at least for me, got me into the stages of progressing with my life even more, because I had built relationships with people in school that suited me and suited them. There was a kinship formed around mutual interests, and because of that, we started to spend more time with each other outside of school, which then drastically opened up my geography, which is a key thing, because for let's say whatever it was, 13, maybe 14 years by that stage of my life, it was really, it all took place between Donamead, the Tonagee Road up to Coolock, and then Coolock. Anywhere I was going was like Airfield on the way, Edenmore on the way, because I had family there. It was all there. And then suddenly you're at 13, 14, you've met people who are from slightly outside of that postcode, and you're moving into town and you're starting to meet people from totally different backgrounds based on mutual interest, and you realize that there is so much more opportunity in the world for you that isn't restricted just to the postcode that you were born into.
And what were those mutual interests at that point that you start connecting with people with? You've talked there, like, ultimately that phase where, hey, we're all like kids and you're trying to grow up, figuring out, hey, what do I like? Who do I want to be around? Is that person good for me, bad for me? What am I passionate about? What do I care about? So as you kind of get through moving up through the years, then into those kind of mid-teens to moving on, what are the things that are connecting you with the people around you, and you're finding a sense of either belonging or a connection, or if it's a creative thing or a purpose thing, what are those things for you at that point?
Yeah, great question. Not football, because that was when I was like falling out of love with football. I think football was something that probably gave me that when I was younger, and then I was falling out of love with it. Thankfully, I've rebuilt that love of football over the past, good couple of years. It's a major role in my life. But not football, which I think is, again, like a bit of a scary thing going into secondary school, and football is like the great commonality between everybody. Yeah, it is. And I was kind of going, I don't give a about this anymore. And then I was trying to think the likelihood that you would have ever met. You probably would have met my uncle at one stage in passing. He probably just would have been in the gaff. But I just had, like a lot of people have, I just had a cool uncle, and he got me into a lot of interest in music. Yeah, just a lot of really interest in music. And I was always just invested in music. And I was always invested in trying to create whatever it was, whether it was music or art. I just wanted to make things. I was really, really invested and interested in doing that. And my uncle facilitated that, not only by giving me music to listen to, opening up my worldview. So much, I think, of what I learned about the world, what I learned about empathy, love, patience in my early years was probably dictated a lot by music. Some of it positive, I would say. Some of the stuff that I learned about love from music was actually really negative. Maybe something to be explored at another time. But I think you just go and you look at a lot of pop music and you go, this is not just pop music, sorry, with a lot of music in general, you go, this is like probably a pretty criminal view on love, not a very healthy one, very possessive. But I developed like a really strong interest in music, which is maybe alienating in one sense, because you're not developing an interest in something that's super commonplace. I think a lot of the stuff that I was into was pretty niche. So it takes, there's like, you need a little bit of confidence there to speak to strangers, particularly in a school setting, about some of those interests.
Because to show up and be authentic about it, like. Absolutely,
because everybody just goes, well, that's an insane thing to listen to, and it's not music, so what are you doing? You're
at that point I was still at Westlife, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Listen, you can't knock it. But I got relatively lucky with that stuff. I know it's something I've mentioned many times before, but I met somebody who I developed into the closest friendship that I think definitely the closest friendship that I've ever had. I met my best friend Paul in school, and that was a consequence of niche interests in music. He, in first year, very early in first year, had a badge on his bag for a band called At the Drive-In, which is like maybe not that niche of a band now, but when you're 13 in the early 2000s, pretty niche band to either be interested in, let alone have a badge of on your bag. My uncle had given me copies of some of their CDs, and it just blew my mind. And I just remember going up to him and being like, that's an At the Drive-In badge. where did you get that? And that being the start of that relationship, one that I was very lucky to be able to extend that to other people, as in a lot of ways, as a consequence of my relationship with Paul. He had already had this lifelong friendship with another guy called Barry, who still to this day is one of my absolute best friends. But Barry also just just an amazing, beautiful person, a head case in the best way possible, and has been since the very first day that I met him. He was also somebody who just had these who just had this really odd and niche interest in music that was so vast. So it was from just really odd metalcore stuff, which would go all the way to just the most common mainstream pop. I remember him bringing me to see Christina Aguilera when we were 16 or something, because he was like, I have an extra ticket, come on, please come with me, I don't want to go by myself, because his interest was just so vast. He would just do it all, and still to this day it's like that. I really admired that about him as well, how brazenly confident he was about being his most authentic self. I think I got really lucky in a lot of ways having those friends. And let's talk on a really practical note. Paul, for instance, probably gave a lot more, his friendship with me probably gave me a lot more credibility within the school system because of how good he was at sports. Because he played football. In fact, I'm almost certain he played football with you at Belvedere.
Really?
So yeah. So you played football at Belvedere, right?
I played for a good few years.
Yeah. I'm almost 100% certain that he played for a period of time with you at Belvedere. So it would have been when he was in you were in nets, right? You played nets?
Yeah.
So did he also? I know he played in nets at one stage for somebody else. I can't remember. I'd have to check with Barry whether he played in nets or not. It would have been short lived enough because he got to 14 or 15 and was like, F this. He was a talented baller, but then just gave it up. I was going to bring that up. I was like, you 100% at some stage
crossed over.
Because it was definitely something that I talked to Paul about when he said he was going to Belvedere. I was like, do you know this guy? Maybe there's an old Herald Sunday League cut out.
Could go try and do a bit of digging.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, look, on a really practical level, I think his talent as a footballer, and then his friendship with me probably gave me a little bit more credibility in school. Not that anybody thought I was going to be good at football, but those Trinity Boys days were long gone at that stage. But that, that I wasn't a total outsider. And then likewise with somebody like Barry, who maybe didn't have the acumen at something like sports, he had something else that I think is maybe in some ways a uniquely Irish thing. I don't know. And it's something that's very much dictated by the tone. The reason why I'd say it's uniquely Irish, and maybe you'd have to meet him to get it. But it is definitely something that's part of surviving something like secondary school, which is that he just had and still has an unmatchable quick wit. So he was able to take any sort of slagging, any sort of negative talk towards him, and immediately just immediately spin it off in just a magical way, and was able to turn things back on people without ever without a semblance of meanness. which is like an unbelievable skill. And again, maybe something that I would say is like in a lot of ways a uniquely Irish thing, to be able to like slag somebody and slag in a group without ever
like cutting.
Without ever cutting somebody, without ever having any of that talk hinge on the tender aspects, without ever having any of that pull somebody down, without ever punching down at all, and being able to survive secondary school by offsetting just 100% of negative drivel that was spat at him was an amazing skill to have, and something that I think probably gave not just him but all of us a lot of courage to more authentically be ourselves, and to do like the weird shit and like get the fucking pink hair and everything that we all had going on in school, because it felt like a bit of a bulletproof vest, and it's a skill. I know that, and I know it's something that we were blessed to have, and something that isn't there for everybody else. But I know that having those relationships and being able to nurture those relationships like that, which is so helpful, because I learned so much from them. I got so much more acceptance because of who they were, because of what they offered as people. And I think that that's one of the great things that friendship does. It leaves you not by yourself, but makes you like this accumulative force, and this just monolith of connection and positivity, as opposed to being left in the dark.
I think that's such a good point, David. And like, I know you've mentioned Barry there, and I think Craig there, and Paul there, and I'll certainly come back around to talking about those guys earlier. But like, as I'm listening to you, like, certainly, so school brings you boys together in terms of a friendship, a kinship, a connection. You're basically growing together and kind of pressing the edges of a bubble, kind of trying to figure out, what yous are about, and kind of what you want to do. And like, it sounds like that transition in school was difficult at times. Like you mentioned, like the likes of a pressure cooker feeling, and kind of being surrounded by that. But certainly, like, what comes through there is that like deep sense of connection and friendship is really emboldened during the school window. And then I was kind of curious, is like, because we've started talking about like us being kids on the street, like so pure, innocent, naive, that kind of school block where you're kind of a boy on the way to becoming a man, or certainly trying to figure out kind of what's going to be some of the core parts of you. And then what were those years like coming out of school? Kind of what happened after that from yourself in your life? What kind of goes on around that time?
So coming out of school becomes that place of no man's land again.
It's a hard transition for a lot of people.
Really hard transition. And I think I had the impression for a long time that college wasn't necessarily something that was ever going to suit me, or furthermore, that college probably wasn't going to be something that was an option for me. I wasn't very good at traditional second level academics. It just it didn't suit me, and I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know whether that's a consequence of the school itself, like the style of teaching, lack of support. I don't know whether it was to do with the environment that we were learning in and the difficulties there, or whether it's just what suited me as a person in general and what I was able to take in and spit back out again. It just wasn't great. It was fine. It was fine. I did okay, but probably not good enough to go in any direction that I initially wanted to. I was thinking about doing like an English course then, and I was getting mixed signals in school itself as to whether third level should be something to aspire to, or whether to maybe go a different route. third level wasn't something that anybody in my ma's side of the family, which is the side of the family that I spent the most of my time with, had as an option. So there was a lot of mixed feelings approaching it. But eventually I went and did a PLC in Coolock, in Coláiste. And I think that was something that worked really in my favour, because it was less of a culture shock than I think it would have been had I gone direct to third level, because I was in what really did feel like a bit of a transitionary period. I was also lucky enough to be able to go with somebody from school that I had like a really positive relationship with and still do. So that I think it helped take a lot of the sting out of that change that you go through in around that age of 17, 18, 19.
Are you feeling a little lost around that time?
Yeah, maybe not as much as I did later into my 20s, but yeah, of course you have a bit of a, I was going to say, of course you have a little bit of an existential crisis. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but yeah, I did. I'm sure I know many of my peers did around that time as well, and I've had many more since. It's part of the human experience, I think, but very much so. Not just feeling I think I probably felt lost in a multitude of ways, right? So, in a very primal level, you suddenly don't know the direction that your life is going. Whereas for 6 years beforehand, you know that there is this one marching forward, that you get up on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you are sorted 9 till 5, 9 till 7, whatever it's going to be. There's a really harsh structure that you can foresee for the 6 years ahead of you, provided that you are going to see out the 6 years of school. That's suddenly not there, especially when you're approaching a 1 year PLC. You kind of don't know what's going to come next. And then maybe on a wider level, yeah, you start to feel how the loss of that structure begins to affect the relationships that you've built for 6 years beforehand, because suddenly these people that you've bonded with, you've grown to love and trust, or that you've grown to distance yourself from as a protective measure, that structure is suddenly not there, and you have this whole new experience where you're isolated again, you're building relationships again. There's a sense of freedom in some way, because you don't have those same oppressors there, whether they be your peers from school, or whether they be at a more superior level, teachers, vice principals, whatever it might be. You're in this whole new structure of your life. I probably felt a little bit more hope at that point than I had done in the years beforehand, though, so I don't necessarily think I was as lost there. I was really lucky that, because of those relationships that I'd built in school, and because of their ability to trickle out into other parts of my life and, widen my roots a lot further, that I was still developing new and natural relationships outside of that structure, outside of that schooling structure, where I wasn't feeling as lost or as abandoned as I might have been. I did the 1 year there, and then I went and did a 3 year course then, which I have mixed thoughts on looking back on it, but that's a different experience than, I think, actually graduating to I can't remember what I guess it's a level 8. I can't remember what way the system works. I'm pretty sure PLC is 6 and 7 or something like that. you go to level 8.
And what is that 3-year course in, David? What do you study for those 3 years?
Oh shit! I did 4 years. Looking back, So I've mixed feelings on it. I was very lucky, and I got to do a fine art course.
Okay.
I studied in NCAD. It's not something that I take lightly. I think it's something that probably wasn't meant for me. That I was lucky enough to get access to. By not meant for me, I mean, I would say myself and many of my other peers from school probably had a bit of a deck sort of stacked against us when it came to attaining certain spots at third level. But my parents, like, kind of, they my dad pretty much broke his back to get me the opportunity to be able to get to third level, which I would struggle to put into words how grateful I am for the sacrifices that my parents made in order to allow me to have access to third level education. I think it was something that was really important to them, despite the fact that maybe it wasn't the traditional course that I was studying, fine art. I think it was just really important to them that I was doing something that they didn't do. I mean, isn't that always the wish that you have for your kids, or that was like it was a weird, it was a weird time. It was odd going into that college. I think in some ways I probably felt fairly alienated. In other ways I didn't. I wasn't going in really with whatever. It was like one other guy that I knew from the area that went in as well. But like, it's tough to know how to talk about it, because I'm still so in the dark about what my experience was actually like there. I think I did feel an awful lot of the time. I did spend an awful lot of time feeling like pretty alienated by the whole college experience, and it was a very tough experience overall. Not because the academics were hard, but just because I saw the strain that it was putting on. It was like a really aggressive financial demand to be able to attend third level, and that's just in Ireland. Like, I can't imagine what it's like to attend in the US, for instance. It's a terrifying prospect, and certainly knowing that had I been in another world, it wouldn't have been achievable for me. And I was very grateful, maybe because of our circumstances, you got some of a grant. But I had a weird college experience. I didn't have a traditional one. I worked like just insanely hard. I just didn't I didn't really party. You know what I mean? Like even still, like I didn't drink from the time I was like 14 until I was like 26 anyway. So I think I had college with like a chip on my shoulder, and I was like, no, I'm going to smash this thing, and I'm just gonna work, and I'm just going to stay in the studios from the first thing in the morning until last thing at night every day. And I wasn't blind to the stats, it was like, so in school, I went to school in Coolock, in Chanel. Like, I don't know what the stats would have been at the time. When was I going to college? 2010 or something like that. Like 2015 access rates to third level in Coolock was like 22%, but access rates to third level from like Terranure were 94% and Dundrum was 90%. Like, this is an astronomical difference in access rate. Even now, accessibility is like just a gargantuan monster that was sort of hanging over me the whole time, and sort of gave me a little bit of that chip, I think. Those accessibility rates, to my knowledge, have not necessarily changed a whole lot. I think you're still like, if you're the difference between an affluent area and a disadvantaged area, there's like a 2-to-1 ratio in access. So like if you're from an affluent area, you're like there's twice as many people.
Yeah, like I was going to ask you, David, like, so obviously someone like yourself experiences such breakthrough success in the traditional sense. So you've had an album of the year, and like before we kind of get to that, like that's why I've been I wanted to dig into like your past and kind of the building blocks to take you today, because anyone who's listened to your music will, and I've listened to the album many times myself, like they'll identify with there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, there's good days and there's laughing, and there's bad days and hurt. And one of the things, before I kind of come to talking about Paul and then how that manifests or how that develops into the album itself, one of the other things I do pick up when I listen to the music, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, is I also get a sense of that there was some pain and some struggles for yourself, like in those kind of early to late to mid 20s. Is that right? Like, what was that kind of chapter of your life like?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely was, probably more so in the later part of those 20s. In the earlier part, I don't think I made a lot of sense of it.
As in, you're just living through it?
Yeah, like I didn't understand what was happening to me. I didn't understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. I didn't understand why I was feeling almost like a loss of myself.
Okay.
Which is something that's, I think, really difficult to come to terms with, and is really developing that understanding is very much a skill set of itself. Maybe something we can touch on later. Yeah, I think like that. See, that pain thing is something I'm still making a lot of sense of, because I think at times in your life you feel normal, but you're taking for granted what's actually happening to yourself. You have normalized the feelings of pain and the feelings of anxiety, the feelings of disillusionment with the world, or the world that's been given to you, or the world that you've created for yourself. And I think one of the things that happened for me when my world opened up again at further level with third level is that I had a little bit more perspective again, and realized that the feelings that I had, the building blocks that were there for me, the day-to-day weight that you carry inside yourself was maybe not something that was entirely normal, or not something that I should have expected as a natural part of living as a 21, 22-year-old, 23-year-old. Now, maybe you could argue back against that and say that of course it is, and that everybody at some stage in their developmental years, whether it's the earlier years, their later years, or maybe again and again as a again and again as a pattern, goes through that sort of existential spiritual crisis. I say spiritual in maybe a very non-religious way, but in a like, what is my sense, what is my place in this world, and why do I feel like, regardless of whatever relationships I build with people, to just be isolated and by myself. It took me, well, it probably took me until I was 28 or 29 and had great services that weren't accessible to me at the time, to be able to come to terms with that and understand where those sort of feelings were coming from.
What were those feelings, Dave, if you don't mind me asking? And then kind of you mentioned services there. What's able to help you start working through that or breaking that down in terms of moving forward as well?
Yeah. So, look, I, in a lot of ways, didn't understand the feelings that were there at the time. And it did take until things took maybe a very tragic turn later in my life, for myself and for many of my friends, to finally confront a lot of the, maybe it might be fair to say, some of the trauma that you might be holding on to, and in other ways just a lot of that just legacy pain that's been there since you were a child and just stacking on top of itself. And it's natural in many ways. It's the accumulation of a life lived. It can be tough. It's not an easy road to walk. But those feelings for me, I think, in a lot of ways, were a feeling of isolation, regardless of the positive relationships that I had built. I've spent so long here to you speaking about all of these great relationships that I've built with people that I was, lucky to love and have loved me, family, friends, even even people in positions of sort of greater power, like educators, and still have a very deep sense of isolation, loneliness, and coldness to the brighter parts of the world. And I would have felt very guilty about those feelings, particularly because of the sacrifices that other people had made to allow me to be in a better position than they were in. So, for instance, the sacrifices that my parents made in order to give me access to third level education, which is something that, was just incredibly difficult for them to be able to do. And I just can't overstate how grateful I am for that. But I would have felt very guilty for having this sort of sense of just severe fear, maybe. Yeah, like a very I was guilty about how afraid I was of being in the world, how fearful I was about my future and my past and my present, how and that guilt is a different layer to that. Is a different layer to that difficulty. You're going in one way through just the natural, maybe unnatural pain and difficulty of of growing, and maybe there's also there's also maybe a sort of a chemical imbalance there, an issue there that probably needs to be corrected. But you also have this sense of guilt that you're dealing with because you feel like after all those sacrifices made that you should just have just total joy and appreciation because you've been given something that people have worked so hard for.
Obviously, that feeling of either self-worth, it's almost internalizing in terms of a shame and a guilt, as you said there, and it's in some ways it's actually pushing you further down the spiral rather than it ever kind of leveling off. It just goes. Is that what you're talking about? That kind of cycle of further and further down into who I am, what I'm about, what I'm trying to do. And you mentioned there seeing a future, like either not being able to see a future, that hopelessness, or questioning your future. Like, is that all mixed up in that?
Yeah, of course. And look, in many ways, it still is today. I just have the tools now to be able to deal with that. I have the support system to be able to deal with that, and I have the perspective to be able to deal with that. Yes, that. I mean, that you mentioned that the sense of self-worth. Of course, that was a huge part of it, and it is still, in many ways, one of the primary parts of it. Feeling that you are not worth what you have been given, feeling that you are not deserving of the world that you are lucky enough to live in, despite the fact that when you break these things down rationally, they don't add up. You understand, even if we have to take things at like a really basic level, there are so many sacrifices that you have made. There is so much that you have dealt with that should allow you to stand on your own feet and say, no, like, I've had enough of the first path that was designed for me. I deserve to have something more than this. But that question is still there, and it still haunts. The difference is that, as I mentioned, I have that skill set there now to be able to deal with that. I have the support system, and instead of it haunting, it's more like something that grounds, because you have that question that comes in, and you can deal with that question at a really rational level and say, no, like let's look at what's really going on here and really antagonize and deal with what's happening inside me.
David, it was just to follow up with you there, like, because you've mentioned kind of having that skill set or those skills, and this conversation is part of the Real Talks with SOSAD Ireland Wellbeing Hub, where we are talking about some of those skills and breaking them down. And I'd love to hear from yourself and your own perspective, kind of what were the skills that were able to, I suppose, help you climb out and crawl out of a dark place that you find yourself in, but also, I'm sure, help you manage the trials and tribulations of just day-to-day life now.
Yeah, so I think there's there's probably two parts to this. The first being, when I first went to college, I started just getting these, like, I didn't know what they were. I thought I was having a heart attack, because the first time it happened, I was walking through, I'd been getting a train into town, and I was feeling something that was different in my chest. I felt hot and like clammy. And then I remember getting off the train and trying to walk up Talbot Street, and then suddenly just like sitting against the wall, and it was just like a sort of black vignette, and everything was swirling, and my heart was going 1,000 miles an hour, and I couldn't move, and I was sitting because I was so dizzy. I had to I thought I was having a heart attack or something, and eventually got my phone out, got onto my dad, and I was like, I need help, something's going on. Obviously I was having a severe panic attack. I just had never had that before. I had no experience with that. I didn't know anybody else. Nobody had ever spoken to me about panic attacks. Nobody had ever spoken to me about nobody had really ever spoken to me about what minding your own mental health was, or nobody ever spoke to me about any part of your own personal health that went outside of, your arms and your legs.
The physical stuff.
It was just all physical. It was like, this is what you do to make sure you don't hurt your knees. Nobody taught me any skills. It was never something that brought up in school. Even when really tragic things happened in school, or tragic things happened earlier in life, whenever I mentioned them to anybody, nobody ever taught me a way to deal with that, if ever you do deal with it, ever it does come up as an issue. Granted, I think the main reason that they probably didn't is that at that point in my life, with the people that I was with, they also didn't know. They also didn't have the skill set there. And I just kept getting those panic attacks over the course of the next couple of weeks, and it was very detrimental. I couldn't make it to college. And I had mentioned it to a friend of mine in college, a new friend, which is a whole new experience, because you're learning to invest trust into somebody that you've only known now for 2 months or something.
Be vulnerable with new people.
Very difficult. I'm very grateful that they're still, to this day, this is one of my best friends, and probably the best relationship that I made from college. Actually, without a doubt, the best relationship I made from college. But they had mentioned that there's a free counselling service. Maybe you should try that. And I spoke to other people about it, and I spoke to family about it. And I think at that stage, they were probably pretty skeptical about the idea of me going to see a counsellor. I think the people that I spoke to, I'd impressed, but probably had some poor experiences with speaking to people in the past, and their impression was very much that, well, you've like gotten so far and you're grand. If you go here, you're going to open up some stuff that you've purposely put away. And I think that, although I understand where that train of thought comes from, because there are people that care about you and they want you to preserve yourself in whatever way you might deem necessary. It's a pretty black and white way to look at self-control, self-development, self-care. And I kind of just said, well, I'm just going to try this anyway. And because it was a free counselling service, I was only entitled to like whatever, let's say 6.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was maybe 6 sessions or something like that. And
what was that process like for you then entering that?
So I maybe pretty scary at first, because I had zero expectation. I did not know what I was going to. The only understanding that I had around any sort of therapy or counselling was really dictated by what I had seen, portrayed on television.
Mine was The Sopranos.
And they're like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And maybe that's the experience for some people. It just was not necessary. Actually, I mean, therapy in The Sopranos is not that bad. It's like, it gets a bit messed up. It does, in fairness. But Melfi was a good psychotherapist or whatever she was. I don't know. But I went to my first couple of sessions and just really, maybe after the second session at least, really candidly explained what was going on. I think the first session, maybe the first and second session, was this just an hour each of just word vomit.
Yeah.
You're
opening that lid of a bottle pressed up or full.
And still, I still have sessions like that now, where I go in and I still just unload almost nonsensical stuff. That was just really alarming to me the first time I ever did it, because I'd never really opened up like that to somebody else before. Anytime I'd spoken and confided in my peers, it was really black and white. It was about this one thing. I want to talk about this that's haunting me. I want to talk about this. It was never so multifaceted. And this counselling experience was multifaceted because I didn't know what was happening to me. And I needed it to be. I needed to just expel. I needed to just get everything out because I didn't know what was going on. And within those couple of sessions, maybe there was no great revelation. And there doesn't need to be. But what there was a skill set shared with me to just level out those panic attacks and to be able to isolate them and spot them before they ever hit red alert.
Can you talk practically, David, what that, because listen, there's going to be people listening to this who either do experience this, may experience it down the line, have experienced it in the past. Like, just practically, and obviously we're not asking you to share like what was causing your panic attacks or whatever, but just that practical skill set of what helps you in that moment, or when you feel that build up or that kind of warning signal flashing.
Yeah, so look, as I said, this is something that works for me, and it has worked for me since then. That's 12 years ago or something. And I'm sure we might touch on this, but that was a very primary experience with counselling, and I've had other, I've gone through many years of other therapy since and learned other skill sets there. But some of the skill sets that I had learned at the time to deal with and spotting the panic attacks was, for one, being very aware of physical tells. So it seems like for me, for whatever reason, like physically, your body seems to know before your mind does that you're about to spiral into a panic attack. I rub my earlobe beforehand. If I spot myself rubbing my earlobe, I then think like, oh shit, yeah, I can feel my chest getting tight. I can feel my blood start to boil. I can feel the sweat start to perspirate from me, and I can start to feel that dizziness. I was just taught very much a very practical skill set that was really to try and help me when I was traveling, which was to sit down and ground myself, put my feet on the ground, try and feel both my feet and my hands on the ground, and then to try and pull out and say the colours of different items in a room, whether it was in a house or in my case on buses or in a train. Maybe this is not something that works for everybody. It is fundamentally something that works well for me. It's as simple as like sitting down and just saying like, cup is grey.
Yeah, and so it's like a focus distraction.
It's just a focus distraction, and it's a grounding that like reaffirms that I'm in this room. I'm in this room. This room is the same as it was 2 minutes ago. I'm not disassociating here. I'm here and I'm grounded. And then start to go back just to the breathing. But those primary steps are just, for me, as simple as just being able to feel the feet and the hands on the ground, and then to pull out these different pieces in the room. In the years since, other things that I've done with therapy and dealing with panic attacks, where I was particularly at a time when I was spending a lot of time at home by myself. Again, maybe something we'll touch on, but I've been just given these little set of blue stickers that I just stick on things, and if I feel like there's a panic attack, it's literally just sitting down and focusing on that and trying to like reassert to myself that I'm sitting in this room and things are as they were beforehand and they will be the same in a few minutes, and just trying to get a sense of time again, because I find when I hit that, time just becomes almost non-linear. Like it's a crazy feeling. Maybe that's not the term, but it's a heavy feeling, and I'm really glad that sense of panic is something that I've been able to like pretty firmly deal with in the years since. And even in the moments when my life is fully turned upside down and panic does set in, it is still something that I've been able to control to a degree, with that skill set and also with that history of them behind me, knowing that things are just it's okay, and I've continued to be functional in moments of panic, as opposed to turning to rubber and just literally ending up on the ground. It feels like a very healthy distance away from me now because of learning that very practical stuff. But that's just something to dealing with pure panic. I think learning how to deal with that wider sense of self-worth and that wider sense of just very, very deep depression is a different skill set, very much. And
I was going to say, and it sounds like when, like and thank you for sharing that example in terms of like panic attacks, because I know it's so helpful and for people to hear just that kind of anecdotal but practical from a person, and not trying to read bullet points on a page or have a leaflet in front of them. I really appreciate that, and I know people listening will. That's it for part 1, and I want to thank you for listening to the Real Talks with SOSAD Ireland Wellbeing series. Make sure you don't miss out on part 2 of my conversation with David Balfe by subscribing to Real Talks on whatever podcast platform you prefer. If you enjoyed this hour or so listening to David and me, I promise you won't want to miss part 2. I've already shared mental skills masterclasses on self-awareness and resilience as part of this series, and in the coming weeks I'll also be sharing more helpful and supportive information. We're going to look at mental skills like authenticity, growth mindset and courage, and how they can empower you to live a happier, healthier life. This podcast was hosted and produced by me, Alan O'Mara. Audio was mixed and edited by Jack Deacon at Plural Video and Design, and the music is an original track called Everyone's Alright by harpist Mary Kate Boylan. Thanks for listening.